America's been at war for like 99% of its history, right? Because that's what governments do, right? The war is the health of the state, and the state is the health of war. So an outsider named Donald J. Trump got into the office, and as a builder, I mean, with all his personal flaws, which are considerable, like I'm one to talk, but Donald J. Trump got into power as a builder. He's opposed to war in all its forms. I mean, free market capitalists tend to be opposed to war. The capitalists, crony capitalists, tend to be pro-war. So Donald Trump got in, and there was no war. There were no wars. I mean, there was a little bombing in Syria. I get all that, bombs some airstrikes in Syria. But he put his ego aside and his moral posturing aside to praise dictators, such as Putin and such as the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. So he got things done, brokered a fair amount of peace in the Middle East, and America was at peace for the most part, for 4 years. Now, you know, the gods of wars get pretty thirsty when you don't give them anything to drink for a couple of years. So, and this is one of the reasons why I had such reservations about Hillary Clinton as a candidate, because she'd already indicated her desire to start at least 3 wars, and one of the big ones that she wanted to start was with Russia. Russia, of course, is hated by the communists because it's an ex-communist country whose knowledge of the origins of communism is pretty acute, and so, you know, they loved Russia when it was communist, and now they hate Russia because it's post-communist and it's nationalistic and fairly Christian and so on. So, yeah, I mean, the war party, and this is true on the left and the right, the war party is back in power, and so they kept pushing NATO eastward, and Putin, since 2007 at least, and I think even before then, has said very clearly that if you try to pull Ukraine into NATO, if you put weapons into Ukraine, we will invade and take it over, because Russia needs a buffer state, right? I mean, America has fairly friendly neighbors to the north and south and giant buffers of the world's largest oceans to the east and west. Russia continually gets invaded, right? With the Mongols and Napoleon and Hitler and so on. They regularly get invaded and lose massive portions of their population and destroy their farmland, their wells, their livestock, because the way that you deal with invasion in Russia is you retreat and you burn your livestock, you poison your wells, you salt your fields so that nobody can get any food, so that the supply line gets too long, winter comes and guillotines the entire army with this sort of icy blades of endless Siberian winter death storms. And so Russia needs a buffer state. And you can like or not like the ethics, but this is simple realpolitik, right? This is the way that the world works and politics works. So Russia said, yeah, you can't pull Ukraine into NATO. And you can see NATO, which was originally designed to contain an expansionistic communist Russia, right? So communism is international, so they were trying to, from Russia, under the communists, bring communism all over the world. But Russia has not had expansionistic tendencies since the end of communism, at least not nearly as much. And so NATO was originally designed to fight communism in Russia. Russia became post-communist. NATO continued to expand eastward because they wanted to provoke Russia into an invasion, which was perfectly predictable. And then they wanted to make that the worst conceivable thing. And because people can't think, because people aren't educated, even in the basics, they don't notice that America has the Monroe Doctrine, right, which says that the entire Western Hemisphere is directly subjugated to America's geopolitical and military interests, right? It's like half the planet is subject to the American government and its whims. Whereas Russia just says, yeah, we really can't have biolabs and weaponry installed in Ukraine, because that takes down the time frame that you need to have mutually assured destruction actually work to prevent an escalation of war, right? So they pushed eastward, and Russia did exactly what Russia said it was going to do. And you know, when there's a conflict, it's a funny thing in human nature, and I feel this tendency or this tug, even in myself. Excuse me. When there's a conflict, significant one, particularly a martial or military conflict, people have a desperate thirst and desire and need to pick sides. You have to. That's an instinct for us, for obvious reasons, right? Because fence sitters tend to get killed by both sides, but if you pick one side, if that side wins, you're relatively safe. So if fence sitters, so people who choose neither side, generally get wiped out by both sides, no matter who wins, or either side. But if you pick a side, then you're more likely to survive if that side wins. So it's the odds of like, okay, I have a 50% chance of survival if they're evenly matched if I pick one side, but maybe only a 20% chance of survival if I pick neither side. So as soon as there's a conflict, we are drawn to choose one side or the other as the perfectly good guys and the other side are the perfectly evil guys, and so on, right? And of course, there's a lot of ambivalence in these kinds of things. You know, there are strong points to Russia, there are terrible points to Russia, there are strong points to Ukraine, there are terrible points to Ukraine. It is a significant money laundering center for a lot of the Western elites, and there is the Azov battalion of neo-Nazis is in the eastern part. They've been shelling civilians even in their own countries and so on. And so, yeah, there's it's complex, and I'm certainly no expert on it, so don't take anything I say with any particular seriousness about these things. But I mean, it's not a war that has a particular amount of interest to the U.S. directly. I mean, as far as war goes, I mean, the Ethiopian war, which has been going on for some years now, it's a civil war, I think, in Ethiopia. It's 500,000 dead. Nobody's putting Ethiopian flags up because they're not told or programmed what to support, right? That's really, really quite tragic. So, yeah, I mean, it's all projection, right? I mean, they said that Trump was going to cause World War III and all that. I don't think World War III is coming, but it is. I mean, it's a real tragic situation. And I mentioned this on the live stream the other day, the premium one. And I will be doing a few more premium podcasts. I do have to sort of get my finances back in order because I didn't ask for any donations for a couple of years during COVID, and I kind of got to get back to actually having a reasonable income. So if you'd like to support freedomain.com/donate. But yeah, it's a real tragedy what's going on, and the people, of course, suffer. If the Ukrainian government had allowed the prosecutor who was looking into Burisma and I guess by proxy Hunter Biden and the 10% for the big guy stuff and all of that, if the special prosecutor in Ukraine had actually pursued this, it seems to me, I would imagine, it's most likely, in my estimation, that he would have uncovered enough corruption that it would have been very hard, if not impossible, to get Biden elected, right? I mean, we know that the Hunter Biden laptop story being suppressed through the election to Biden because 17% of Democrat voters wouldn't have voted for Biden if they had known about the Hunter Biden laptop story and the unholy contents. There's an interesting book out there called Laptop from Hell, which is worth having a look at in terms of trying to figure out this kind of stuff and what was actually on there. You could not create a digital collection of more demonic bytes and bits if you tried. So if the Ukrainian government had not taken what seems to me kind of a bribe from Biden and the administration, which was the $1 billion loan guarantee that Biden threatened to pull if they didn't fire the prosecutor looking into Burisma and therefore his son, if they had simply pursued that, then it seems to me very unlikely that Biden would have been elected. If Biden hadn't been elected, you wouldn't have this same push for war. And so they take their $1 billion and there's a war and 2.5 million people have to flee. And everybody makes moves like the bad guys have no moves, right? Everybody makes moves like the bad guys. I don't know what it is, like whether it's superhero stuff or whatever, right? But I mean, it just came out today, and I talked about this again in my live stream from the other day, but the direct blowback is going to be most likely a run on the US dollar, right? Because now Europe gets 40% of its energy from Russia, right? So the idea that they're going to be doing much to oppose a war is anybody with half a brain, and it's mostly just show. Now, Russia, because they've been sanctioned so heavily, has now said to Europe, oh, if you want to buy energy from us, in particular it's gas, but to some degree oil, and maybe this will expand to one of Russia's most important exports, which is fertilizer. If you want to buy energy from us, you're going to have to use rubles. You're going to have to use rubles. Now, of course, that is going to raise the value of the ruble enormously. It's going to drop the value of the US dollar. And the US dollar, as the reserve currency of the world, is I mean, China's going to work with Russia. They're going to introduce some other petrodollar. And again, the average people, they're cheering and they're putting Ukrainian flags on and they're repeating a bunch of propaganda. And then inflation and all of this is going to hit even harder than it is. And that's the price you pay. It's the price you pay for just being led along by the nose and being told who to hate and who to love and not thinking for yourself or having any skepticism about the general narrative and so on. So, yeah, that's the people pay and the elites get rich and so on, right?